My name is Melinda Plett. I was born in Bishop, California in May of 1983.
Now, where did you go to school when you were growing up?
Let's see. I went to a small private school, like kindergarten through third grade, and then our parents decided to homeschool us. So then I was homeschooled third through 10th. Then I went to the public high school in Ridgecrest, California. There's a Navy base out there where my dad, he was Navy and ended up being stationed in California his last tour, and then we worked as a civilian contractor out at China Lake then he retired from there last year. So I ended up being homeschooled and going to public school there, and then went to community college after I graduated high school at Saracoso, which is a little community college in Ridgecrest. So when I went to community college before the Army, I had been studying sports medicine. So I was already technically a certified EMT in the state of California, and had done a college like sports medicine athletic training. So it's kind of like a sports medic. You stand on the sidelines, and when somebody gets hurt, they come to you. My favorite was doing the high school football games because you get to stand like right on the sidelines and have to dodge people trying to like tackle you. So that was fun. But yeah, so I'd already had a little bit of experience in doing some medical stuff, but nothing nearly as intense or as involved as military medicine, because you're dealing with people that are in pieces or sewing up. A lot of infantry guys decide to like slam their hands in doors pretty frequently. So I stitched up a lot of fingers. It tends to be a thing that they like to do. I'm not sure why. It's probably one of their general orders. I'm not sure. It seems to be a thing. Yeah, I definitely joined only to be a medic. I went to the recruiting station and said, "Can I be a medic? If not, I'm not going to sign the paper. Like, I'm only willing to do this. If you can make it work, I'll do it. If not, I won't." I was a little older. I wasn't 18. I was 22 when I joined, because I had done community college for a couple of years and went and worked for a couple of years. So you have to take the ASVAB, which is the Army, or what is it, Armed Services, whatever, test. Like, it's like a SAT test or a standardized test, just to see like how smart you are, I guess. I don't know, but you get ranked in like different areas, and so what your score is depends on each MOS, or military occupational specialty, is determined by like what your score is in these different areas, and if you qualify for it based on your scores. And the highest you can get, like the highest score is 200. That's like if you get everything correct. So the recruiter, I was going to take the test, and both my little brothers decided that they would go also, because they have to register for selective services and they have to take this anyways. So why not just all go together? So we all went in and took it together, and about 2/3 of the way through, my next youngest, or I have two younger brothers, the oldest one gets up and leaves, and the other two of us look at each other and we're like, okay, I'm finished doing the thing because it's on the computer. And it turns out, like, when we got done, the brother who had left, he had finished it in like record time and got 198 on it. My other brother scored 197 and I scored 195. And the recruiter like talked to my mom, "What are you feeding these kids? Like, what? How? What the heck is going on?" And so I pretty much qualified for anything I wanted to do. And like, "You sure you want to be a medic?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's the only thing I'm interested in doing." Because I thought I wanted to go into medicine. So one of the reasons why I did military is figured I could get some experience, some money for school. I figured out if that's actually what I wanted to do, because 12 years of school is quite a big commitment if you're not sure. And during that time, I realized that I don't like sick people and I hate hospitals, so probably that's not the career choice for me. So I'm fourth or fifth generation military on both sides, my mom and dad. My dad was Navy. His dad was a medic in World War II. His dad was a medic in World War I. So pretty much since my dad's side of the family has been in the U.S. when they immigrated here, just prior to World War I, they've all served. All his sisters were nurses in the National Guard. And then my brother also was a medic in the Air Force. And like on my mom's side, her dad was Coast Guard, his dad was Army, his dad was Army. So I don't know if it was destiny or just something in our genes. I'm not really sure. Basic training was in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. It's like not something you remember much of because you don't really sleep the whole time. So it's like, where was I? It doesn't really matter. It's the same. And then I went to 68 Whiskey School, which is medic training in Fort Sam, Houston, which is in San Antonio, Texas. I mean, we had more in-depth training. It was like, so you do your basic training and then you do your secondary training, which in the Army is called AIT, Advanced Individual Training. So that trains you in your job. So that was 16 weeks. So we basically had 16 weeks of combat medic training, which is much more in depth than what I was teaching everybody else with this stuff. But so we just had instructors, and then you ran lanes and did exercises, and I had more training than most people do, except for other medics. So you do your medical section, and then you move on to weapons clearing, and then you move on to how to get out of a rolled over truck. And so it's like a week-long training that you do before you deploy with your brigade. But because my brigade was already over there, I just went straight over there, and it was kind of funny. And then straight from there, I got stationed at Fort Drum, New York with 10th Mountain Division, which has interesting historical roots here in Colorado. And my unit that I was assigned to was already in Afghanistan, and they had just lost 2 medics in an IED blast. So the unit I got assigned to, kind of the way the military or the Army works at least, if a unit is deployed and they lose somebody, then they're first like in line to get a new person. And so me and 2 other ladies that I was in basic training and secondary training with all got sent over there right out of training. Like 2 weeks passed. I got to Fort Drum, I was there for 2 weeks, and then got deployed to Afghanistan. And so that was interesting, but straight into the fray, you know? Because the way they issue you equipment when you get to a new unit, if depending on which unit you're with, you either have like first priority or last priority or somewhere in the middle. So depending on what gear they have at the central issuing facility, they give you like what you qualify for based on which order you rank in. Well, because my unit was deployed and they had already gone through and gotten all their gear, I kind of just got what was left over, which meant they had just switched from DCUs, which is the desert camo, to the ACUs, which is the digital kind of like blue and green gray ones. So I got issued like half of each of things. So when I showed up in Afghanistan, I had like a BDU helmet cover, which is the dark camouflage, a DCU, which is the desert camouflage, like camo back. My uniforms were ACU, and I didn't have a rifle because when they deploy as a unit, they take like the armory with them. So I show up looking like completely mismatched, and like, what is wrong with you? Like, where's your rifle? I don't know. I'm a brand new private. I don't know how this works. I didn't know I was supposed to bring a rifle. Was I supposed to bring my own? I could borrow one from my dad, I guess. I don't know. So it was kind of interesting. You know, an interesting first reaction or interaction with the desk sergeant, because I hadn't slept in about 46 hours because flying back and forth, and she was irritated because she was on night shift and was asking me questions like, well, why don't you have this? I'm like, well, wouldn't I like to know? So I got in a little bit of trouble because I had a bit of an attitude at that time, but yeah, so it was kind of interesting, but situations out of my control. I didn't decide what stuff I got issued, and I didn't not give myself a rifle, so I was a little frustrated with her being irritated at me. I'm like, yeah. But it all worked out eventually, and they found me actual gear that was the right color and, you know, a weapon, so.
So what kind of a shock was it going from the United States to Afghanistan?
Well, the first shock, like I said, it looks exactly where I'm from in California. So from Fort Drum, which is upstate New York, the East Coast, you know, like 30 miles south of Canadian border, which doesn't seem like home to me at all, because I grew up in a desert valley where there's mountains and sand, and then you deploy to Afghanistan and you get off the plane and you're like, wait, did we just go to where I'm from? Because like it looks the same as like where I grew up, and that was like kind of like the first shock, because it felt instantly like home, which is not the thing you'd expect when you deploy to a country that is not nearly as developed as the one you're from, but you're on a base and you're like living in tents mostly, so I don't know. It seemed unshocking, which seemed shocking, if that makes any sense, because it was so familiar to me, which I found very odd. But then, not even a month later, I was starting going out on missions outside the wire with infantry guys, and I got attached to the infantry both times I deployed, actually. So I wasn't with my medical unit, because up until, what was it, last year when they opened all jobs to females in the military, it was only you could be in a like support battalion, which is like medics, cooks, drivers, mechanics, and then because of the mission we had in both Iraq and Afghanistan and the culture there, they started embedding female medics and truck drivers in with the infantry so that you could have women who could search the local women if they were coming on our bases, just because we try to be culturally sensitive to them, but security is always first, but you don't want to try and piss off people for no reason if you can have another woman, like, make sure that they're not carrying a weapon or anything. So I was in that situation where I got attached to the infantry. So technically I wasn't there, but in actuality I was, because like you're not allowed to be in the infantry, but they needed us, so they found a way to make it happen. So it's kind of like signing over a piece of equipment. Yeah, I'm like, oh, you're now with these guys for this year, and so that was interesting. But I don't know if I would have had it any other way, because I made a lot of good friends, and got to help people and be actually there instead of kind of sitting in the back in a tent waiting for something to happen. So.
How were you accepted by the men?
By my own peers, like we all saw each other as brothers and sisters. As some of the older enlisted men who didn't think that women should be there, yeah, it was, nobody treated me poorly because I'm pretty, I don't know, I grew up, I was a tomboy, so I kind of acted like a boy anyways. I used men's body wash and shampoo, so I smelled like them, and like I smelled like a clean man. But I didn't wear like women's perfume or use like shampoo that smelled, like flowers, because guys are sensory. You don't want to be like drawing attention to yourself for no reason, because I was the only woman out there with, like a few hundred guys, and just better to kind of blend in than to try and stand out, I guess. Me and two other ladies did a interview with Colorado Public Radio, and just talking about, it was right after they opened up all MOSs to women, and kind of like just want to get like our reaction on that, and like asked us some questions. But the question that they thought was most interesting was about kind of like blending in with the guys versus like standing out, because men and women are different. Like, it's biologically, we just are. And when, like me sitting here right now, I wear women's perfume, and I, wash my hair with a shampoo that I think smells nice, and I wear clothes that, are feminine. But in that situation, you're one of very few, and you're not trying to draw attention to yourself, because, I don't know, I think it's disrespectful of your like male counterparts, because they're away from their wives and their girlfriends for a year, and yes, you all of a sudden are looking attractive to them, and kind of like downplaying that seems like the most respectful way to be part of that group. But some would say, well, you shouldn't have to, because feminism and whatever. But that wasn't my experience. I found that they respected me more if I tried to be more like a man, I guess, than if I tried to like act more like a woman. And I actually had one sergeant that I worked for say that he actually appreciated that, because yes, I smelled clean, but I used like men's body wash, so I smelled like Old Spice, and like, because I mean your senses, like you're aware of things other than just like what you choose to, and smell is a very strong sensory perception that yeah, so I don't know why they thought that was funny, but I don't know if that's interesting or not. But like the only thing that was kind of, I don't know, it bothered me a little is, so when you deploy, you're eligible for certain like combat awards if you see action, and so I should have been awarded a combat medic award because I was there, and like my truck got blown up. We responded to several other like incidences, so there was multiple occasions when like I qualified for it by like the situation I was in, but the sergeant major at the time was of the opinion that I wasn't going to get an award if all his guys hadn't gotten one yet. And so even though they hadn't earned it, I couldn't get it because they hadn't, yeah. So that was the only kind of thing that I found that was a little irritating, I guess.
That's pretty frustrating.
Right. Because they're like, oh yeah, you're not really here. You can't be here because you're a woman, but also you're going to do this thing, but you don't qualify for the award that somebody who's standing next to you does, so. Yeah.
Did you had a truck blown up?
Yeah. We had the group that I was assigned to my second deployment. Um, our mission was like the resupply mission, so we would take all the water, fuel, ammunition, food from like the main bases where they were shipped into out to the smaller combat outposts or COPs. I try not to use too many acronyms because I have to translate. But because we're on the road so much, part of Afghanistan we're in, which is RC East, so along the Pakistani border, um, there weren't like groups of armed combatants that we were coming up against too much, but they loved to sit on the side of the road and blow up our trucks. So we lost a lot of guys and a lot of trucks to IED blasts, and yeah, my truck got hit once, and luckily it's one of those things that had we been 4 inches farther to the right on the road, we would have like rolled down the mountain, and probably none of us would have survived it. But instead, it picked the truck up and blew it into the side of the mountain, so it blew the whole side of the truck off. But all of us are, beat up a little bit, but not. We're all still here and have all our parts, so that was a good thing. And like the gunner happened to be, it's like crazy circumstance. We were transporting a bunch of local national trucks because we're trying to boost their economy, so we'd hire their drivers to transport supplies too. And he was sitting up in the back of the teacup, which is like the little armored gunner hatch thing. So he was sitting up in the back of it, trying to count to make sure all the trucks were there. And when it hit, and the 50 cal gun, which was in the back of it, got blown off and like across the side of the road. And if he had been standing there, like it would have gone through his face. But instead, he just got picked up and yanked back down, and so I think he fractured a rib, but not bumps and bruises. It was crazy when all of us could have not survived that. Luckily, the reason why all of us are okay is because we're in an MRAP, which is the big up-armored, the really tall trucks with the V-shaped armor plating on the bottom. It kind of like deflects the explosion out, whereas a Humvee is flat on the bottom, and so oftentimes like the force would just go through the bottom of the truck, which obviously doesn't bode well for the humans inside. But the problem with MRAPs were designed for Iraq, which is a flatter, more urban environment. So you want to be tall and high up to be able to see. But in Afghanistan, where you're riding on these little mountain roads that are mostly traversed by donkeys and small vehicles, having these huge up-armored trucks it's not what they're designed for. And so more people would die from blasts if it blew the truck down the mountain, or it landed upside down in a creek and then you couldn't get out. But they do their job when it comes to deflecting energy away from the occupants. I don't know the exact timeline of when they were developed, but we didn't roll in them very often. My first deployment, which was end of 2006 through the middle of 2007, but by the next time we deployed, which was all of 2009, pretty much you weren't allowed to take a Humvee outside the base. Like we still had them over there, but you weren't supposed to take them outside on any missions, just because the environment we were in, IEDs were the main attack method. So yeah, I think it mostly depended on like which part of the country you're into. But I wasn't in charge of it, so I don't know what the actual the plan was or what the rules were.
You encountered quite a bit of combat then.
Not like live firefights and stuff, but I mean they were sending rockets into the FOB all the time, trying to bomb us, and like our trucks kept getting blown up. So it's not the type of combat that you see in war movies where like you're running and shooting, and like I never shot at anybody. I carried a rifle the whole time, but I never fired it except for qualifying on the range, because I just never was in the situation like that. And the part of Afghanistan we were in our mission wasn't engaging combatants so much, but because I was a medic, I also, even if you're not in the situation, they bring all the injured people to you, so you get to see a lot of injuries and wounds, and try and help guys you can, and try and not stress too much about the ones you can't.
So circumstances are different from other wars, but the war is still the same.
It seems like it. When humans decide that it's okay to kill each other, it never ends pretty.
Were there other male medics with you?
Yeah. There was more of them because they actually belong to the infantry units. So an infantry unit is set up, they have, let's see, it's like 7 to 10 guys per squad, and then I think they have 1 medic per platoon, which is like 4 squads. I think I'm not exactly sure. Maybe it's more than that, but we all would operate out of the aid station unless we had a mission outside or with one of the groups. So I got to know all of them pretty well. My first deployment, I spent kind of bouncing between the 2 infantry battalions and the cavalry unit, which is technically an infantry group. It's historically and traditionally a cav unit, meaning that on Thursdays they run around in cowboy hats and put spurs on their combat boots. But in reality, they do all the same stuff that the infantry guys do. They have, scouts and squads and that run out and do missions. But I bounced between those groups and my unit, which was the main hospital support in Salerno, which is near. I can't remember the name of the city it's near, but it's near one of the main Afghan cities, and so I would spend part of the time there. We supported the CASH, which is a MASH unit. Besides, it's a combat surgical hospital, not a mobile army surgical hospital. The only thing that's different is the uniforms, though. If you watch MASH, it's the same thing, same green tents, same incoming casualties over the radio, and all the little medical people come running, incoming casualties. We all run to the medical tent. The uniforms are different because, it's changed since that war era. But watching MASH kind of makes me feel like I'm back in it, kind of, because pretty much all the procedures are still similar, which is kind of funny to me. And we still live in the same green tents. Yeah. Combat Surgical Hospital, or a CASH, it's a full-blown trauma center, basically. You have surgeons and nurses and doctors and sometimes even specialists, I'm gonna forget the name, for bones, trying to set bones back together. People who are specialized in nerves, reconstructive, hand surgeries and stuff. Just depending on, they have that ability for capabilities, X-ray, MRI, all of the equipment, but still working out of a tent, which is fun. I got to help assist on a couple minor surgeries, you got to hold the little things open. So they were reconstructing a finger, so I got to hold the little metal pieces that you hold the skin open so that they're fixing the nerve in there. That was pretty cool. Your back starts to hurt because you're leaning over. You're okay, just hold still. But yeah, the capabilities of a combat surgical hospital is pretty much anything you would find at a trauma center here in the U.S. They're just wearing uniforms.
Light has to be a big part of it, though.
Yeah, they have a generator and a backup generator and a backup generator for the backup generator because, you can't do things in the dark. But then the second deployment, I was attached specifically to an infantry battalion, which was 287 Infantry. So I was with them the whole entire time. I actually left with them, was embedded with them the entire time. And with that group, there was 12 women on, and the FOB that we were on, or the Forward Operating Base, there was, I think, 1,200 guys. So, one girl to every 100 guys. But so we all lived in one tent together, and it was me, one other medic, 2 truck drivers, actually 1 local interpreter, and a couple officers that were in charge of things. So the places we lived, again, experiences may vary because the place you fly into in Afghanistan, the first major Air Force base, Bagram Air Force Base, there's buildings like you would see here, regular walls, ceilings, electricity, what you would expect as, a normal building. And some of those buildings had bunk beds or cots that you lived in. So when you first transition into the country, you're living in something that seems more familiar. It may be a cot, but if you're in the Army, you've slept on those before. It's not like a big shock. And then depending on where you get sent out to after that, if it's another larger base, you may again be in a brick and mortar building, or they also have these things, what are they called? They call them chews, which is so the big shipping containers, like Connexes, they're made out of those. So they just like ship them in, and like they have like windows cut out of them, and like they have like insulation, and then like either plywood or sheetrock on the inside. So it's just like a small building, but a lot of the officers lived in those, and some of those were made into like showers. So it'd be like a long shipping container that just had like shower stalls in it, because they're easy to ship. You can pre-build them on the inside, and then you basically just have to like hook up water to them. So it's pretty. I thought those were pretty cool. I never lived in one, but they were kind of cool. And also then the lovely green tents that most of us lived in. So yeah, the entire year of 2009, I lived in a tent. So my living space in the tent was, a cot is about this wide by 6 feet long. So my space in the tent was as long as my cot, and it had about this much space beside it. So we all, just because you kind of feel like you need your own personal space a little bit, we would like hang either sheets or blankets in between, just strung with 550 cord like across. So it was kind of looked like this weird slumber party tent when you walked in, because there was like random blankets of all different colors and sizes hanging up, just so you kind of had your own little bit of privacy. But I still like camping, which people find surprising, even though I lived in a tent for a year. But it's a different experience. But people are always like, why? Why? You want to go hiking and camping? What's wrong with you? Well, I loved it before. It's not like, something is going to change my opinion of that. But it was interesting. I was the designated spider catcher in our tent because they don't really scare me. So we have, I'm sure you've seen the horrendous pictures of camel spiders, which are actually, we have them in California where I'm from. They are actually a part of the scorpion family. It's not actually a spider because they have, I think, 4 or 6 legs. But the pictures you see on the internet, they're like this big, and they're like, oh yeah, they kill camels. No. So you have like a small tarantula that's about this big. I mean, it's not any bigger than like your hand. And so they would often be like on the roof of the tent, and so you didn't want to like swat it, because then it would run into anybody's space and you'd never see it again until it was like sitting on you. So if you take like a cardboard box and just pop it up against the top of the tent, because it's like a flap, then it would fall in, and you slide a piece of paper over, and you can take it outside and deal with it. But yeah, so they'd be like, Plett, come get the spider. Yeah, jeez. So yeah, that was my job in the tent, and those spiders weren't the ones we actually had trouble with. There's also an indigenous wolf spider that bit people a lot, and you wouldn't notice it because it would like bite you in your sleep or it would crawl in your shoe. But whatever bacteria it is that they carried would get infected really badly. So you wouldn't know that you had a spider bite until you had like this big, like red, swollen spot, or it was pretty gross. You probably don't want to know about it. Because that's part of my job, is like draining the pus out of all these wounds for like 5 people every morning, because the only way you could deal with it in a very non-sanitary environment, we live in tents in the dirt, you can shower sometimes every day, but not necessarily. The way the wound tracks, whatever the bacteria is, it would get under your skin, and it would kind of like eat away in between like your top layer of skin and like your subcutaneous fat layer. So it would make these track marks like in between that would get full of this lovely green, clotty, pussy stuff. And so the only way to fix that wound is you kind of have to like drain it out of like cut a spot and drain it all out, and then pack it with sterile gauze with like iodine on it, which feels wonderful, I'm sure. So there was like 5 guys that would come in every morning. You had to do that. You had to like take the gauze out, drain out the pus, and stuff more gauze back in there, and it would slowly heal like out. And so each time you'd put like less and less gauze in, because it was kind of like the wound was healing behind the sterile gauze. But yeah, it was not a fun thing. But the guys like to come to me to do it because I did it the fastest. I wasn't the most gentle, but like it hurts regardless of if you do it gently and slowly or if you do it quick. And I just did it, and they're like, okay, like hold your breath for a minute and then it'll be over, But yeah, so those are the spiders that you actually like, that concerned me more, not these scary. The camel spiders look scarier, but they don't actually bite you, so it didn't really matter. And the other ones were the big like daddy long legs. We have them here in Colorado, where they have like the flat little body and like the big long legs. They were in everything. I was sitting on my cot one time reading, and one crawled over the top of my book. I'm like, oh God. because that means that I was sitting here and this thing crawled up my leg, and up my arm, and because where did this come from? It wasn't in my book. It crawled from the floor. I'm like, oh, jeez. That's what I wanted to think about before I go to sleep. Thanks. That deployment, I was pretty much didn't see many other women. But my first deployment, because I'd gone to replace a couple medics who had just died, I was kind of picking up all their missions and bouncing between where they were. So I wasn't really with one group more than a couple months that whole deployment, which was interesting, but I learned a lot, which is good coming straight from training. They train you a certain amount, like how to put on tourniquets, how to stop bleeding, and do basic medical stuff. But they don't teach you a lot about medications that are commonly used, or we didn't learn how to do sutures or anything. But because I got kind of bounced around everywhere, everybody was teaching me stuff, so I got to learn how to do sew people back together, which I find really fun, which is weird. But sewing skin is cool. It heals, And then you get to go back and check your work. I don't know. It's interesting. People think I'm weird, but it's okay.
That's amazing, though.
It's a useful skill.
Oh yeah, for sure. Indeed.
But I was going to ask you actually with the training whether you thought it prepared you or didn't prepare you for what you were about to face. You kind of answered the question, but
to some degree, yes. But you never actually know how you're going to react to a high stress situation until you're in it. So they try in training to stress you out. They make you run across a field and crawl under a thing and put on your bag, and then have to low crawl to a casualty and start an IV on somebody. So you're your heart rate's high and you're breathing hard, and you have to have a steady hand and put a needle in somebody's vein. So they train us and stuff like that. But I mean, that's not ever actually what you're going to do. But it kind of gets across the how to remain calm when you're stressed out, when your body has a certain physical reaction, how to kind of put that on hold for a minute, deal with the thing, and then go back to being yourself. So, I mean, they trained us how to do all the basic life-saving procedures when you can on people who are in really bad shape. But not everybody can handle stress, and you don't know that until you're in the situation. But I did learn about myself that I am the person that is the calm in the storm, which is something good to know about yourself, I suppose, because we came across a situation where we were returning from a mission, and another convoy was coming towards us, leaving for a mission, and their front truck hit an IED and rolled towards us down the road, and for some reason, that group of guys had left the wire. They didn't have a working radio. They didn't have a medic with them. And it was supposed to be a quick scout mission. But if we hadn't been there, they wouldn't have been able to call for help. They wouldn't have had a medic on scene. So it was kind of crazy. And everybody was losing their minds. And what do we do? What do we do? I'm like, everybody calm down. You go call the medevac. You go do this. You go do this. And they're like, okay. So then I just gave everybody a job, and we had a brand new lieutenant who didn't know what he was doing. I'm like, sir, go get on the radio and call the helicopter right now. He's like, okay. And runs off and does it. So all of a sudden, the only woman in the situation, one of the lowest ranking people in the situation, was all of a sudden in charge of everything because some people were hurt and everybody didn't know what to do. But I guess that's a good thing to know about yourself, that when things happen, you're not going to freak out, but that's not something you can train, I don't think. Part of it is just your own disposition, though. I have friends who have really bad PTSD that were in situations that were either similar or less intense than what I was in, and I have it a little bit, certain explosions still make me bristle if it's at a certain frequency, but I don't have to run into a closet and hide, and it doesn't make me, I just recognize it and then okay, deal with it and move on. But it's your own inner ability to deal with stuff, and it's not a training, and some people can't get used to it, some people can, and I don't know if there's a way to find that out before you're in the situation, because you really don't know until you experience it. One of the things that I did when we were back in the rear in Fort Drum, in the rear means in the United States, sorry, I taught the class for everybody. So now everybody who deploys, part of your kit, which is your flak vest, you have like your ammunition, attached to the outside of it, and you also have your IFAK, which is an individual first aid kit. And so that was something that was sort of new, just as I was getting into the military, and it's like a little pouch that I think, depending on which unit you're with, it's mounted to a specific spot, like everybody has it. And you open it up and it folds out, and you have a roll of gauze, a roll of like medical tape or athletic tape, for bandages, a 3-inch needle for doing needle chest decompressions in case like you have a chest wound, you have to relieve the pressure because it collapses your lung, and an airway, which is like a long rubbery straw that you stick in somebody's nose if they have like a facial trauma, and a pressure bandage, a tourniquet, and sometimes they went through stages of having different types of combat gauze, which was anything from something you pour into a wound, which like cauterizes. It's like a chemical that basically burns all the flesh so that it stops the bleeding, or a bandage that sticks to, like it just adheres. So like you have to remove it surgically, like you can't just like pull it off. But then you had to train guys, you can't lick this and stick it to your friend's head because then it will stick there and you have to go get it surgically removed. Like you can't, it's not like duct tape that you can just pull off. It's not a joke. You don't play with these things. So I had to teach this class for everybody on how to use everything in this kit. It's just like basic first responder stuff. Stop bleeding, start breathing, get them to somebody who has more training. But they found that just addressing things like bleeding right on the spot, you had a higher survival rate, because if you have a certain blood vessel that's severed, you can bleed out in 2 to 3 minutes. And if you can train people that the tourniquet, which they call it a CAT tourniquet, a combat application tourniquet, you can actually apply it to yourself with one hand. So if you have one arm that's blown off, you can take this thing and put it on yourself because it's a Velcro, and like you can do it with one hand or just like your teeth if it comes to that. But training on everybody how to use it on themselves and each other, because so often it is an extremity that is something you can quickly fix, and survivability rate is pretty good. I mean, trunk and core and face, obviously you don't put a tourniquet around your neck if your face is bleeding, but that doesn't really help. But I taught that class, so that was, everybody had that amount of first aid on their person, so you always had that to work with. If you're going to somebody who's injured, they at least have that much equipment. But I also carried a big full like rucksack full of other equipment, an aid bag which had IV supplies, more bandages, more tourniquets, neck braces, splints, just kind of like all of the on-site trauma bleeding control, stabilization stuff. But some situations you didn't always have your stuff with you, so everybody having their own, at least a little bit of supplies, you could do something, at least to help things you can help in that situation. We carried morphine and just basic like sick call drugs, which are like Benadryl and antidiuretics, ibuprofen, which I'm sure if you've talked to military people, you know about. They either call it vitamin M, Motrin, or Ranger candy, or like everybody eats so much ibuprofen or Advil all the time, just because most injuries are musculoskeletal, bumps, bruises, strains. So everybody has, if you've served, has a pretty high tolerance to ibuprofen. So if I have like a headache, I take like 800 milligrams, which is like a double dose for most people. So obviously we carried that.
By the way, way back, it was APCs in the military.
Yeah.
Aspirin.
Yeah, right. Which aspirin, they stopped having people take that because it does thin your blood. So if you're already bleeding, it doesn't really help with the stopping of that. But ibuprofen is an anti-inflammatory, and so it kind of has this similar, you take it for similar things that you would take aspirin or Tylenol for, but it doesn't thin your blood out, which is helpful when you're trying to not bleed. I carried a couple EpiPens, which are for anaphylactic shock, like if you have a bee sting and your airway closes. So I had a couple of those, just because not everybody knows if they're allergic to bee stings. Unless you've ever been stung by a bee, you don't know if you have an allergic reaction or not. So just to be careful, we always carried them. And anybody who knew that they were allergic to bees also carried an EpiPen in their own first aid kit. Because it's just one of those like auto injectors. You just take the cap off and stab it in your own thigh or in somebody else's. And what else? Morphine. So we had to carry Narcan, which is the like the antidote to morphine, like if you have an overdose of it or if you have a bad reaction to it, to bring somebody back. I think I only give morphine to one person. And it wasn't even on, it was during a transport. He had gotten, it was on the base, they were just doing like moving, loading stuff, and he got pinned between two trucks and broke his pelvis. So yeah, he was in a lot of pain. So we made sure he was comfortable.
Now, that's a lot more sophisticated than what the World War II
Right.
medic talked about, because they sent him out with
Popsicle sticks and a piece of, yeah.
It was sulfa powder and maybe some penicillin or some and just bandages.
And morphine, yeah. Just to touch on, you were saying you talked to a World War II medic. My grandfather was actually a medic in World War II on Omaha Beach on D-Day, which is something he would never talk about. And he died back in 1997, I believe. So before I even joined the Army. And I wish that I had the opportunity to talk to him after I had served, because I think he would have talked to me then about just kind of some of the struggles you face. But just that scope of injuries and casualties, and just the number of people that were injured, and the lack of equipment they had back then. I mean, they had like popsicle sticks and cravats basically, and like powder that you'd pour in wounds. Like they had nothing compared to what we have today. Again, like I wish I would have been able to talk to my own grandfather just about his experience and how it was the same and how it differed. And I can't even imagine, because when we have a mass casualty incident, usually that maybe it's 5 or 10 people that are injured and you have 1 or 2 other people helping you. But when you're storming a beach and everybody's just getting mowed down, you're there by yourself and like there's no support behind you. It's like the ocean. I can't even imagine what that would have been like and how to process that or deal with it later. I don't even know.
One other thing that came up last year when we interviewed this one medic, he talked about the fact that once he sent people back, he never knew what happened to them. What about you? Were you able to find out what happened to the guys that you were with that you had to patch up, and did you find out what was going on later on?
So I only was able to find out about what happened to somebody for one person, and it's because it was in the group that got hit that was coming towards us. Crazy thing. I almost had to do a crike on this guy because he had hit his chin on something and like busted his entire face open. So he was having trouble breathing because he had an injury here. So knowing that this truck had flipped down the road, it's one of those things where you have to make a call. You're like, okay, I know this guy has a spinal injury, because it's like any car wreck. So you're not supposed to put somebody on their side. If they have a spinal injury, you're supposed to keep them on their back, keep their neck still, and not move them at all. But there was like 6 other guys that were hurt too, and if you cut a hole in somebody's throat and stick a tube down them, then you have to sit there and breathe for them, or like you can't walk away if you've done that. And so I couldn't make the decision to do that because there's 5 other people I have to take care of also. So you're doing triage basically. And so I made the decision I took I rolled up somebody's shirt or jacket and put it between his shoulder and his head to try and keep his spine as straight as possible. But I put him on his side so that he could breathe, because then like the blood's draining out instead of going down into your lungs. But knowing that, I'm like, I could have just paralyzed this guy. I know I made this choice, and I don't know if it was the right choice. How do you know in that situation? And so we put him on the helicopter, and of course, when we're carrying him out to the helicopter, that litter decided to break. So we're carrying him, the guy who I know his spine is injured, and like the litter breaks. So I'm trying to like hold it together while I'm carrying him and putting him on the helicopter. But because he was in a unit that I knew of, and we had like mutual friends, I'm now friends with him on Facebook. And so I've kind of been able to follow his like progression through his treatments and stuff, because as soon as they got him to a higher level of care, they're like, why is this guy on his side? He has like they had to do reconstructive surgery on his spine, but he's walking. He has like scars where they had to cut him both ways to fix his neck and back and stuff, but it's a situation where you're like, okay, well, he's alive and he just got married, and like you're like, okay, maybe I made the right choice, you know. But it's hard to know because I don't know how anybody else did. Nobody else was in that situation, in that group. But like I don't know what happened to the rest of them or if how they're doing. But kind of knowing that he's okay kind of makes me feel that, you know, I was there and I did what I could and I helped people. But so yeah, that's the only person I know of that I've been able to see like how they've done since I helped or, you know, was there as their medic. So my truck, we had like the plan, each mission or group has their own kind of like combat casualty care plan. And so ours was, I always rolled in the last truck in the convoy, and anytime, if something happened, the plan was to bring anybody who was hurt, just bring them to the back of my truck. And like that's where we were gonna have like our mobile aid station out of. So I had litters and spine boards strapped to the outside of my truck and a couple other ones just in case, because you don't want to have one truck that looks different because then you make yourself a target. So you kind of like scatter them throughout so it looks random and like not important. Kind of like you don't paint a big red cross on your truck anymore because it is a NATO rule that you don't attack the medics, but in the war we're in currently, there's not really, people don't follow rules over there. So you didn't want to make yourself more of a target. And in my truck, we'd also, if it was the summertime, we would have just big, the coolers like full of water, but we'd have them full of ice and just bed sheets because if you're trying to deal with a heat casualty, you need to cool them down. And the air conditioners didn't usually work in most of the trucks, and so having ice and, you know, a material that's soaked in that, you can like wrap somebody in a cold sheet, and that helps bring their body temperature down if they're heat stroke or heat exhaustion. But yeah, so depending on where I was at, I either had everything or just a little first aid kit, depending on what the situation was. So the, what do we call it, CASEVAC, the casualty evacuation procedure, depended on like where you were, what the weather was like, how close you were to a higher level of care. But they call it the golden hour. You want to try and get somebody from point of injury till the time that they're in a surgical ward with, you know, surgeons. You want to try and get that done in an hour because that gives you the highest survival rate for serious injuries and traumas. So we had medevacs, which are helicopters. The dust-off group, the medevac people are dust-off. That's a specific group of helicopters. They're the Blackhawks, which I actually would have loved to have been able to be a flight medic, but I wasn't able to get into this school because I had a first sergeant who didn't think that women should. But anyways, side note on that. So if you're like out on the road and you're not within I think 10-minute drive back to like where you came from, like the situation where my truck got hit, we were really close to where we were going, so we were bumped and bruised. Nobody was seriously injured, so we didn't even call in. We just went to the next place because there was a physician's assistant there. So he checked us all out and made sure nobody had major concussions or, you know, punctured lungs, all that stuff. Like I can evaluate that, but I'm not a medical doctor. So if it's a life-threatening situation, you want somebody with a higher level of training to check you out. So in that case, we just drove to the next spot. Like they just packed all of us in other trucks because ours was no longer, like it was in pieces. But in that case, we didn't call a helicopter because also you couldn't because it was like the side of a road. Like you have to get, if you want to call in a helicopter, you have to get them to a place where they can actually land. Otherwise, it's of no use. But you have the 9-line medevac. If you're in a place where you can call a helicopter, it's like a little card. Everyone has one in their first aid kit also. And it's, you know, on the radio, hey, you, this is me, we're here, we have this many casualties, we need this special equipment. So it's 9 lines of order. And so if you get on the radio and say, I have a 9-line, like everything else goes silent, they let you call the helicopter in just because that's like priority for getting casualties out. And we had really good response time where I was at my second deployment. like they would get there within 12 to 15 minutes of calling them in, just because they were stationed in places and they were always on like alert. So you call it in and they're spun up and in the air within a minute or two of you calling for them. So I was really impressed with that. Like the situation with the other convoy where I had to extract everybody, there was 5 guys, and so I barely had enough time to get them like stabilized, splinted, and on litters, and then the bird was already landing. So I was like, oh well, thank God, because I don't know what to do next, you know, because at that point you're like waiting, and you're like, okay, like I don't have a hospital here, even if you know what you might need to do for somebody, or even if you don't have the training or the supplies, like, you know, what do? You know, hope they don't die while you're waiting, but yeah, so evac time was pretty good in the places I was at. I know that's not true of everywhere, and some of the more mountainous areas, like if we had had an issue in some of those places, like we couldn't have called somebody in and it could have been a lot worse, but yeah, it definitely depends on the terrain.
When you were over there, it was around what, 07 to 09, that area, that time. Iraq was still going on. Was there a sense with the people that were there that Afghanistan was kind of forgotten and it wasn't getting the attention that it deserved at that time?
Especially during my first deployment, that was definitely true. Let's see, it was August of 06 through June of 07. So during that time, people completely forgot that we had troops in Afghanistan. So anybody, people always ask me, like, I was coming back from a deployment, like, what's Iraq like? I don't know, I wasn't there. Well, where were you? Afghanistan? We still have troops there? Oh, yeah, we never left, we're still there. But the second time in 2009, it was back in the news again, and so people would then ask, you know, where were you, which place, because people were still aware that there was people in both war zones, or whatever you want to call them. Yeah, so it was interesting deploying the first time, because people and civilians in the U.S. had no idea that we still had troops in Afghanistan, and like, oh, okay. Because it's a completely different situation than, say, Iraq, or Iraq. It's they had a strong centralized government. It was very corrupt, and there was problems, but their culture is used to having an infrastructure and kind of a social order in the entire country. Whereas Afghanistan is broken up into these tiny, like, little provinces, and depending on where you're at, it's either very tribal, and they have like a different language. Like where we were at, they speak Pashtun. Parts of the country speak Urdu, which is what they speak in Pakistan. Persian, Farsi, Arabic. Like they don't even all speak the same language, and they're very isolated. One of the outposts we were at up on the top of this mountain, I was the first female with the United States or the Allied forces that was ever in that place, because the locals looked at me and were like super confused. They didn't understand what was happening, and one of the guys up there who came in, because we would just to try and have goodwill to the locals, we would do I think on Thursdays or Fridays do like a local sick or a little clinic, so that you could come in with minor like injuries, and we'd try and help them with their medical problems. There was a guy that came in and thought we were Russians. Like they didn't realize that the Russians had left. Like he was this old man. He could barely walk, and but in talking to the interpreter, we found out that he thought that we were still here as like the Russian groups, because many of us are light-skinned, blue-eyed, look like that people group. So that was kind of funny. But I had learned enough of the language to tell people how to take medications in Pashtun, because it's just a number and how many times a day. And so I had told this guy how much of ibuprofen to take, because he was having muscle aches, because he was 89 and been walking up and down a mountain his whole life. So he had pains in his knees and ankles. So I told him how to take the medication, and he acted like he didn't understand what I was saying. And then the interpreter said the exact same thing, and then he understood what it was. But he was of the traditional type where a woman could not have more knowledge than a man, and if I was telling him something, it was apparently not true or false, or I was trying to trick him in some way. So that was kind of funny. One of the things we did, we worked with a local women's clinic in the city that was near our base during my second deployment, and so talking to them was really interesting. because you see the typical Muslim woman fully covered in, like, they were the light powder blue colored ones with just a little screen, and but once they get away in a room with you with no men around, they take that off and they're like the most boisterous, group of women that you're like, wow, like you actually have personalities and you're people underneath that tent you live in. But they're the ones that would, like, community organizers, try to make things better. They just kind of have to adhere to it because it's the order of things there. Well, if they get too out of line, though, they ended up getting killed or ostracized. So probably why you don't hear much about it, because it has to be kept kind of quiet. In my opinion of people, if we turn the country over to the women over there, then things would get fixed quick, fast, and in a hurry. But that probably won't happen, so.
You haven't figured out a way to do that?
No. So because of the way kind of they have like small cities, or not even, like, it wouldn't even be a city, it would be more like a group of homes, maybe 5 or 6. And they'd have farms out there, or they'd be like, they would have herds of goats or sheep or livestock. So we'd go through these areas and they would be our friends one day and the Taliban's friends the other day, depending on, like, they wanted to support us, but as soon as we drive past, if somebody's holding a gun to your child's head, then you're going to change your mind of who you support. So we would roll past one day, a day and do our mission, and then come back the next day, and then there would be a bomb in this yard, even though this guy was our friend, the day before. So it's not that necessarily the local populace has necessarily strong feelings every way. It's whoever is threatening them the most at the moment, which, I mean, if I was in that situation, I don't know that I would make a different choice. So it's hard to view them as friendly or enemy, because it's kind of like they're on neutral ground until something sways them either way.
They're trying to protect themselves and stay alive.
Yeah, which is anybody, that's all we all try to do, I think. Most people in Afghanistan don't speak English because they have no reason to learn it, except for that we're currently occupying their country. So pretty much any time we would go outside on missions, you had to have a medic with you, and you had to have an interpreter with you, and you have to have like a certain number of ammunition and trucks and all that stuff. So we pretty much any time a group went out on a mission, you would take an interpreter with you. So these guys mostly would wear our uniforms too. I mean, they didn't have like all the same ranks and stuff, but we would give them just blank uniforms, again, to make them not a target when we're out walking around, so they look like they blend in with us. But it definitely made it easier to talk to people, because it's hard to communicate if you don't speak the same language. The people who we hired a lot of local nationals to like do jobs like building buildings, transporting goods, things that we could hire that weren't like military sensitive jobs. So some of the interpreters we worked with, like, they kind of realized that we were actually there to try and help. But then when we leave, I don't know if you've seen in the news lots of those people who worked with us and are trying to get visas to come to the U.S., they're getting denied because they're Afghan people and they're bad. So then they have no work and they can't find work if the group that was there before we were took back over, or their lives and families are in danger, or they get killed because once they're not working with us anymore and they're not so I don't know. I don't know if you're getting to people because I think their minds were changed, but then after we leave, then they realize they're abandoned. So I don't know what goes on in their mind at that point. I can guess, but it's a little frustrating knowing what the work that you did the first time, like building schools or fixing bridges, or the missions that you supported, or the things that you saw your brigade doing. And then coming back the second time and seeing those things destroyed or blown up because they're like, oh, well, we built them. So the whatever group, the Taliban, I guess, decided, oh, we're going to blow it up because they built it. So it's kind of frustrating when oh, my friend died supporting that mission, but everybody was like, well, yeah, it's bad, but now these kids can maybe get an education, and then hopefully the next generation will be more educated and aware of the world and not just stuck in this small-minded ideology of like us versus them. But then coming back and seeing all those efforts have been destroyed, it's kind of frustrating, and you kind of almost lose faith in the mission over there because, well, what's the point? Like, we're gonna do all this work, we're gonna try and help these people, and then all of our efforts are gonna be destroyed just because it's us trying to help. I don't know. It's it's not a feeling that it's hard to describe, I guess, because you don't want to not believe that doing good things for people is wrong, but you kind of start feeling that way. Afghanistan's an interesting place. Every major world force has like marched through Afghanistan, starting with Alexander the Great, and maybe we should just leave them alone. I don't know. I mean, I really think we should just get out. Like, it's a mess, and I don't think we can fix it. Like, it's a country that's, especially Afghanistan, I can't speak for other areas because I wasn't there specifically, but it's like been at war with itself and all of its neighbors for all of recorded history. I don't know why we think we can go in and fix it. I mean, and it seems like we keep arming our next enemy, so maybe we should just, okay. I don't know.
There's no answer.
I know there's not a good answer, that's for sure. Unless you want to talk about like wiping entire people groups off the face of the planet, which probably isn't right also, but yeah. It's not something we can fix, and it seems like a waste of lives to keep trying. Between deployments was when I was trying to get into flight medic school, and being one of the medics on like the helicopters, because Blackhawks are so much fun to fly in. They're so great. But I was not able to do that, and so I would have stayed in probably 3 to 5 years longer if I'd gotten to that school, because if you do a secondary MOS, like you're required to serve a certain amount of time afterwards, because they're spending millions of dollars to train you. So if you just end your contract after a year, then it's not worth the training. So once I realized I wasn't going to be able to do that, and deploying a second time, realizing that I was probably going to deploy every other year for as long as I stayed in because of my job and experience, I was like, I'm done. I don't want to be deploying every other year. It's hard because you come back for only a year and you get your stuff out of storage, and do I even unpack this? What do I do with my car for a year? I had a Civic that I parked in a parking lot where all the other single soldiers put their stuff, and you come back and your wheels are rusted solid from the hubcap into the brake shoes because they salt the roads up there. So if you don't move the car for a year, it just rusts solid. So they had to come scoop it up on a truck, and they couldn't even like tow it because the wheels were locked. But yeah, so just trying to live and back and forth, I just decided that's not what I wanted to do. So I got out, but I stayed in the National Guard because you're required to do 8 years total, 4 years active, 4 years inactive, and you can choose to either do National Guard Reserve or be in the inactive reserve. So I chose to do National Guard with a unit up in Wyoming while I was going to school, which I think is, if I had to give anybody advice of how to get out of the military, I would say go back to school and stay in the National Guard, because school gives you structure, and if you're in the National Guard, you're at least going and putting on your uniform again once a month and being around people who, you feel like you're people. And so it's kind of more like a gradual step down instead of just being like, okay, I'm taking off this uniform and I'm never putting it on again, and I just lost my whole family. So, it's kind of like quitting smoking, I guess. It's easier to, if you have like a lower dose of nicotine in your system than just quitting cold turkey. But yeah, I think that it helped me kind of transition back, because you still like still feel like you have support when you at least you have drill once a month, and those people, if you needed somebody to talk to in one of the days that you're not with them, they would of course pick up the phone and you could talk to them. So I think that's helpful. But so that's what I did. Yep, while I was going to school and doing National Guard. while I was deployed the second time, I started doing like bunches of research, trying to figure out what to do, and went to school for interior design for a while, architecture, and then ended up getting a degree in environmental studies, focusing in sustainable development, and a minor in graphic and web design. And that's what I'm doing now. Is I do like layout design work for multi-page publications. So I ended up getting a job in what I got a minor in, which is, the way things go sometimes. But yeah, I sometimes miss. I liked being a medic. I don't know that I would want to get into medicine because it seems like Western medicine isn't necessarily about healing, but about treating symptoms. It's not necessarily about health. It's about like you have a cold, so here's some drugs. Not like, oh, maybe you should, improve your diet and exercise more and like boost your own immune system so that you're not sick. It's kind of like reactionary instead of proactive, and I don't know. That's frustrating to me. So I didn't know that I wanted to be part of that system. But yeah, so now I'm trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. Still working on it. Not sure. 33 and trying to figure it out still.
Do you find that you kind of gravitate toward veterans, other people that have been in the military, or find them?
I think so. Yeah. Because it's just kind of like that mutual understanding. Even, like when I was in school, I worked in the Veteran Services Office at CU. And so, I was in the Army, there was an Air Force vet who worked in there was a couple of Marines, and so we all kind of like harass each other, like the printer's broken. Like, did one of the Marines touch this? Like, why is the printer broken? And so it's kind of like that good-natured jabbing at each other, kind of like siblings, basically, We like to call it mutual or equal opportunities harassment based on mutual respect. And so, like, you harass each other, but it's only because you kind of have a level of respect for each other, and like you all served and you all sacrificed part of your life for something that you believed in, and it's almost like it's similar to like firefighters or EMTs or nurses, doctors, people who serve the public with their lives. It's a different mentality than meeting the bottom line or meeting deadlines for shareholders, or it's a different mentality, and I think you definitely prefer to spend time with people who kind of have made that same life choice or have that same like community-based perception or whatever choices that they made.
Do most people know about your military background?
If I tell them, but I have the advantage of being a woman that I can get away with nobody knowing that I was in because it's not assumed. I went back to school when I got out. I think it's one of the best ways to transition out of the military because it's semi-structured, and then when you have a piece of paper that's of value to civilians, so it's helpful. Because it doesn't matter what your training is in the military, like it doesn't count for anything, because it's not like civilian education, it's not certified or accredited. But walking around campus, I can pick out which guy is from military. I can tell. You can tell by the way they walk. Usually most of them have still do the military haircut because they're just so used to getting their hair cut every week or clean shaven, looking around like something's about to happen, like scanning rooftops for snipers. Like you can just like look at somebody, or I can tell, if it's raining or snowing, a lot of people still have their combat boots, and they're a good pair of boots. So I already have them and they're broken in, so that's what you wear to school, or a backpack or like patches. So as a guy, it's harder to blend back in. But as a woman, it's easier to blend in, but I think it's almost harder because nobody believes that you're like a real veteran. Like, oh yeah, you were in the military, but you probably just sat, in the office and did paperwork. And that's true of some people's experience, but some guys did the same thing. Like if you're a record keeper and you never leave the country, like yeah, you wore the uniform for 10 years, but you never left, Montana. So experiences may vary in the military for sure. But I know one of the struggles I had, like I was saying, trying to find that community again, it's harder for me because I'm a woman. Guys who served are not always accepting of, women because maybe they had a bad experience with a lady that they served with, or they again are like, oh, well, you just couldn't understand what this is like. I'm like, well, I can understand because I was there with guys, maybe not you, but I was there and I do understand. So kind of feeling like not necessarily ostracized, but a little bit. It's a boys' club, let's be honest. It's the military. When guys get together, they're like, oh, no women, we don't want them, we just want to be disgusting and ourselves. Not really, but sort of. So trying to like find that, like where do I fit again is, I tried working with, veterans groups and don't necessarily feel like that's my home or tribe anymore, and trying being a civilian and people get stressed out about things and I'm like, nobody's shooting at you, quit being stressed. And I'm like, well, yeah, but the deadline. I'm like, nobody's dying, take a deep breath. So just kind of the like trying to work in a job where things that people get stressed out about to me don't matter, is they're like, well, you just don't care. I care, but only to a degree where it's not affecting my health because it's papers. It's if this brochure doesn't go out on time and it's one day late, what happens? Nothing. It's like nothing happens. Nobody dies. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. Because the people that you serve with kind of become your family, and once you come back and become civilians, you sort of keep in touch with some people, and things happen, car accidents, cancer, people die, motorcycle wrecks, and so on a few occasions, some of us have gotten together to kind of commemorate deaths of people that we served with, that were non-combat related. Yeah. But it's hard because it's like even if you haven't talked to them in 4 years, you find out that they died at a horrible accident at work. It still affects you because it's like your stepbrother. You care about them, and it's hard.
Did you see others that were going to go ahead and stay in the military that were
Well,
in the medical field?
I have a couple friends. So one of the girls who deployed, who I went with basic training, AIT, deployed with, all that, she stayed in. She's still in, actually. And so she went, she became a drill sergeant because once you reach a certain rank, you either have to be a recruiter or a drill sergeant for a couple of years, just like in the Army. If you're an E6, I think. Yeah, you have to do, it's like there's 2 routes, and then you go that way or that way, and then you can come back and like be in like the regular Army again. But if you want to make a career out of it, you have to like check that block of either you did recruiting or you were a drill sergeant. So kind of like watching her, all the fun that drill sergeants get to have with new trainees, because we went through it together, and there's certain things that you remember, and then kind of like seeing her like write on Facebook like, oh yeah, I did this thing because of this guy. You remember that crazy drill sergeant who used to say this thing? So it's kind of, I know that if I would have stayed in, I would have taken that route, and there's kind of like, oh, maybe I wish I would have done that, but I don't necessarily regret getting out either. It's a choice you make, and then you're on a path, and you have to make the best of it. What is it? 1 or 2% of people serve in the military, and so everybody in my family has. So it's weird to me not to know somebody who has, or not have friends who do, and because I was in, a lot of my friends were in with me. But I've met people who are like, oh, I've never met somebody who served in the military. How is that even possible? Like I don't understand how that's possible, but percentage-wise, in the population of the entire United States, it is like 1 or 2% of people who ever serve in the military. Well, I guess, if you're that small of a group, I guess it is possible to never have interacted with somebody or known somebody or had a family member, I guess. So it's hard to, because we're so vast, it's kind of hard to have that community where you feel supported when you come back of people other than people you were with.
Civilians and people that you knew, did they really have a sense of what was going on at all with any veterans that were coming back after a tour like that?
I think that's been the struggle of military veterans since forever. The kind of the mentality of you go into a situation and it's going to be terrible, and it's probably going to change you, but I don't know that you know how or how much, or how even to describe it to somebody who wants to know, like, well, what was it like? Well, you don't want to know what it was like, and I'm not going to tell you. I went so you didn't have to, and that's kind of the, like, I'm going to take this is my, like, burden to carry. And I know that's been kind of, like, the culture of military veterans, for as far as I know, and of people I've talked to, like I'm not going to tell my mom what it was like to try and treat this kid who was in a few pieces, and like that's just not. She doesn't need to know that. That's not. Even if she asks, you're not going to tell her because it's terrible. And part of like serving your country is you kind of taking that so other people don't have to. But I had read a good article once about, I think it's probably like Native American culture or a like pretty modern society kind of hunter-gatherer culture where the warriors were treated in such a way that they would go out and fight, and then they'd come back in and tell the entire tribe the stories and how horrible it was, and everybody would sit around and listen to just the atrocities because their culture, it was a small tribe, but their belief was that this is our burden to bear as a group, not yours alone. And so, especially since you had to actually do it, you shouldn't have to carry it by yourself.